Welcome back to the Cream City Club podcast. I am Spencer Michaelis, and I'm here as always with Gunnar Amelin. Gunnar, how you doing?
Doing good. I don't think I've felt any better going into a Bucks podcast. We're getting ready to talk about it. The vibes are pretty high right now after that win streak, which we'll talk about, of course. But feeling really good, Spencer. So how you doing?
I'm doing well too. Bucks are winning. The team I coach, we went 2-1 on the weekend, had a good weekend, so been a good stretch for my sports teams. I'm feeling pretty decent. Before we get into anything else here, though, if you are listening and you haven't yet subscribed, please take a moment to do so on whatever platform you're listening on, and to rate us 5 stars. Follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod to stay up to date on these episode releases. Today's going to be a Bucks focused episode, as you may have gathered from what we talked about there. But Gunnar, we haven't really been able to get together for one since the All-Star break. We got a decent amount to cover, but what do we have coming up specifically on this one?
As I mentioned, we'll be talking about that 6 game win streak that we've had since the All-Star break that you mentioned. We'll break down sort of that full recent game last night of the Clippers game, our instant reactions, all that good stuff. Then we'll break down more of, since we've got a bigger sample of Doc Rivers, really what's changed with him under the helm of the Bucks. What are the differences are we seeing right now? Then next, we got 2 new additions. Since the All-Star break, but Pat Bev obviously was, of course, the All-Star break, but 2 new guys sort of infiltrated into the Bucks team, and we'll see how sort of those guys have worked out with us or haven't worked out with us so far. Pat Connaughton and Bobby, we've seen some differences with their play since the All-Star break, and really under Doc's regime, you could even say to an extent. We'll break those down and kind of figure out why that is. Then we're going to have Khris and Giannis health updates, concerns. Really, how far does that extend with either of those guys as far as concerns go? And then we did get a new signing of a two-way player as well, Spencer. That's always very exciting. So I believe you had a topic, though, that you wanted to bring up first before any of those things that we jump into.
Yeah, I think before we get into all the recent developments, there was something interesting on Jeff Teague's podcast with him and a couple of his buddies from his childhood, but the Club 520, or the 520 Club, I want to say it's called. But anyway, they had Brandon Jennings on as a guest. It was a good episode. It wasn't as long as I was hoping. I thought we might get more stories than we ended up getting on it, but Jennings did throw out something super interesting, and he said that the Bucks offered him a 4-year extension in the summer of 2012. I think he said it was like 4 years, 42 million, something along those lines. And his agent never told him about it because they were shooting for a max. And he actually mentioned that it kind of hurt his relationship with his mom too, because she knew about it and didn't really say anything. But just looking at it from the Bucks perspective, I mean, think about how much might have changed if the Bucks did end up giving, or Jennings did end up agreeing to this 4-year extension. I mean, you can start off with just what the Bucks got in return for the trade of Brandon Jennings to the Pistons, which was obviously Brandon Knight at the time was the headliner, but Khris Middleton was that secondary piece. And I mean, you look at what's happened over the last decade since that trade happened, and how much Khris Middleton has meant to the Bucks, and how much of an impact he made during the finals run, and just Giannis and him being such a great tandem. You almost wonder if any of this happens, if Jennings agrees to that extension. And I know at the time, I'm not going to speak for you. I'll let you talk in a second here, but I would have been thrilled if the Bucks extended Brandon Jennings. I mean, I loved Brandon Jennings when I was, I guess that would have been when we were going into high school at the time. He was one of
Yeah.
my favorite players we had ever had on the Bucks. I mean, he was an electric player when he was going right. But when you look back on it, he really wasn't that efficient. He probably wasn't as good as I thought he was as a younger kid at the time. But yeah, I guess, what did you think when you heard that? And obviously, I think knowing what we know now, you would probably say it's good that it didn't work out that way. But how would you have been viewing it back then, I guess?
At the time, for sure, I was in your exact boat. Remember being extremely sad that we were not re-signing Brandon Jennings, that we didn't know all the behind the scenes. I feel like they might have mentioned that we offered an extension back then, but I might just be making that up. I don't know. But
I think
um,
the Bucks said they did, but Brandon Jennings never knew that they
yeah,
did.
at that point, it was too late, which is his point. He may have found out about it in the second half of that season, but it was already, at that point, we were already going probably a different direction. Um, and we've talked about maybe trades, that trade deadline. We could have got Josh Smith, and who knows if he was in that trade or something. So the ties were, you mentioned his family, probably between the Bucks too, the ties were pretty much severed at that point, which is crazy to think about because of how much of a, I guess he's not a hometown hero, but a fan favorite, I guess is probably the best way to put it. Is people know him now as being this legend of the Bucks, but really back then it was a weird breakup. He mentioned too in that on that podcast that he wasn't going to go to Atlanta, but he almost picked Atlanta. So even though or they were interested in him. So even though he did end up leaving, imagine if he just picked the Hawks or something, somebody else who had wanted a point guard at the time. So you don't get Chris Middleton that way. So to think about he left and all that, what that meant to us even back then, but he left, picked the perfect team. The guy that we thought we were going to get, Brandon Knight, was going to be the savior, ended up being this 6'8" skinny guy who was just a throw-in second round pick G Leaguer in the back end of that trade ends up being what saves our franchise, part of it at least. And you mentioned I don't think we're winning a championship without Chris Middleton, but we obviously probably we still would have drafted Giannis. So at least you get to keep Giannis because I know you're always worried about that, what it affects. So we still would have had Giannis, and I guess you can work around that. You just would have took more moves outside of that to make a championship happen at that point. But as I mentioned, I was a huge Brandon Jennings fan. My dad took me to a random Bucks game, and it was his rookie season. Obviously, it was 8 games into the season. He was like, "You want to go to the Warriors game tonight?" And I'm like, "I guess." And he got like 10 rows behind whatever center court. And it was Brandon Jennings' 55-point game, so I'll never forget that for sure. And then ever since then, I was a huge fan. So um, I love Brandon Jennings to this day. It's awesome that, and also weird to think he's only here for 4 years and he is this like huge icon with the Bucks. But well deserved for me. I always appreciate people who love Milwaukee. So
Yeah. And I do think I can't guarantee the Giannis thing happens if Jennings is on board because the rumor at the time when we were going after Josh Smith was that we might trade that pick for Josh Smith. And I can't even imagine how I would be feeling right now if I watched the Hawks draft Giannis because that's the team that wanted Giannis too. Funny
yeah,
enough, like they're the team that was trying to move up in front of us to take him because they wanted him so badly. If they had that pick, they would have absolutely taken him. Watching him have this insane career for the Hawks after trading it for Josh Smith would just be, I would never give up on the Bucks, but it would be a rough existence at the moment for me. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think everything, and it's funny that it was Teague's podcast because Jeff even talked about how he was like, I heard you were leaving, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to sign this offer sheet with the Bucks because I'm going to get to go there and just get the ball in my hands and do all this. And obviously, the Hawks ended up matching at the last minute. I think we talked about that on a different episode actually at one point, but
Mhm.
it is crazy how much would have changed. And you never know. Maybe Jennings and Giannis would have been a great pairing, and maybe Jennings never tears the Achilles like he did when he was in Detroit because he was playing very well that year. I think he might have led the league in assists, or he was close to it at that time.
Yeah.
Him and Andre Drummond were a very, very fun pairing for like half a season there until he got hurt. But yeah, the whole existence of the Bucks would be quite a bit different if he found out about that offer. So in a way, we can thank Jennings' agent for not doing or for not telling him and for shooting for that max. But crazy to think about. It's always interesting when stories like that come out because for this whole time we just assumed he didn't want to stay when we offered him or that we insulted him with the offer or whatever. But in reality, it sounds like he probably would have taken the offer if he had known about it. So I think that's all we got on that. But we can move back to the present day, decade later, have a ring, and things are starting to look a lot better. We come out of this All-Star break, and like you touched on briefly, 6-game win streak. Now, obviously, 2 of those games are the Hornets. The Sixers don't have Embiid for this game. The Bulls are the Bulls. They're just very mediocre. But the first game out of the break is against the Wolves, and if they're not the 1 seed right now, they were the 1 seed, I believe, in the West at the time, or they were the 2 seed maybe. They are a tough team, and they're a really tough team with Gobert and Cat coexisting this year, which they obviously didn't do very well last year. 112-107 win. I felt like that was just a really gritty win where things weren't going super well. We got a little Dame time at the end of it where he hit a couple big shots and he hadn't really been shooting well in the first half. He had a really solid second half. We had talked about on the last episode how during the All-Star break we were kind of hoping that 3-point contest, the All-Star game MVP, all of that would give him some confidence. And I think over the 6-game win streak, the stats might not look incredible by any stretch of the imagination, but watching him play, it looks so much more like what I was expecting him to be. And I think the shots are going to fall. And we'll talk about that Clippers game in a minute where he obviously the shots did fall on that one. But I think we're starting to see him figuring things out. And I don't know. Do you have anything specifically from any of these games you'd like to touch on? I mean, for me, the impressive win was the Wolves one and then the Clippers one that we're going to talk about. But we handled business against teams that we should beat. And that's really nice to see because that had not been happening for a decent stretch this year.
That was going to be my point is we brought in Doc Rivers, bunch of reasons. We have a list of those reasons, of course, but one of them was we weren't getting those commanding wins against teams that we should be beating. It's just every game felt like it was going down to the final minute, basically, and we were super good in clutch, and you leaned on guys, like you mentioned, Dame, to pull it through, but that takes a lot out of teams, especially before even the calendar year turns over. We were doing that multiple times in a month. So that's just kind of wear and tear on you. But that's my biggest thing with those games is I don't really care. And we'll break down the Clippers game is why that one was different. But um, all those games we had a moment in there where we could have did the same old thing that we normally did in the beginning of the year. And we could have said, all right, we'll just play with them until the end. We're better than you guys, but we'll kind of play with our food here. And eventually in the last 2 minutes, we'll take it over. But a lot of those games, it was even before the fourth quarter where we said, no, we're going to take command of this one, bringing different types of things. And we'll talk about that again in this more specifically in the Clippers game and what those things are. But really good to see. And I pulled some stats here over these last 6 games just to put it in perspective a little bit for us. So over that stretch of those 6 games, the Bucks own the best defensive rating in the league at 102.6. We're also third in offensive rating, which in the Doc era, we'll call it, I guess, for what is it, like 16 games with him. That was also a question mark is, okay, the defense is looking better, but now is the offense going to pick up anytime soon? Because that kind of looks a little stagnant. And clearly over these last 6 games, that's clearly been improved. And then, of course, those two numbers turned into the second best net rating, which I think the Celtics are blowing everybody away right now. It's not even close.
They're plus 30 or something in net
Yeah.
rating at the moment, and the Bucks are 19 point whatever that is. I'm not doing the math right now, but yeah,
Yep.
I feel like the Bucks are starting to look honestly, for those who watched, what game was Bobby mic'd up for? Was that the Wolves game? The third, I think it was
Yes.
when he said Bucks are starting to look like the Bucks again, and it was like I mean, it really does sum up how it's looked the last 6 games. It looks like the team we expected to see, and we've been missing Chris Middleton for all 6 of them, and that's a big deal. So it's been impressive, and we'll touch on the specifics of some of these players and stuff in a little bit here, but I do want to point out a couple things from that Bulls game. So first half, they went to this well, not all bench lineup. It was Giannis or Dame. They've been running out one of the two with a mix of Pat Bev with Bobby, Gallinari, and then Pat Connaughton. And I talked about it when we signed Gallinari. I do not like the idea of Bobby and Gallinari on the court together at all. It just scares me. I think it's a very bad mix. I will say both of them have been much better defensively when they've been out there together than I would have anticipated, but it still would be something that I would be pretty afraid to go to very often. And I think they held their own in the first half. They weren't terrible. I don't have the exact numbers up, but I do know what happened when they subbed in the fourth quarter. They went with AJ Green instead of Gallo, and that was the same exact lineup, but with AJ Green out there, and they went on a 17-0 run immediately. And AJ Green is working his way into the rotation again, even with when Gallinari showed up, they kind of pushed him out, it felt like, just because one of the concerns we've always had with Doc is that he's going to go vet heavy instead of continuing to give the young guys chances. And it felt like AJ was getting pushed out, and then he got that chance in that Bulls game. And this can kind of lead us into this Clippers game because AJ ended up making a pretty big impact in that one too. But him and he seems to feed off energy kind of in the same ways that Bobby and Pat Bev and guys like that do, but he does it in a much more controlled way, obviously, emotionally. But he came in and he hit a mid range, then he hit a pull up or like he came around a screen and hit a three, and then he brings people to him offensively. Like people do not want to leave him once he makes a shot, and there's a huge impact on offense. But it's hard to overlook, or it can't be overlooked, that he's playing good defense when he's on the court. It's not even like he's holding his own on defense. I think he's legitimately playing positive defense when he's out there. He moves his feet pretty well. He works very hard, which is a huge part of defense. It's caring and trying. And I mean, that ties into everybody on the team right now. There's just a much better effort level, but he bodies up really well. He stays vertical really well. He's not like he had a couple plays. He's gotten scored on a few times, but it's plays where he made a finish very, very tough. And the guy made the shot, but he didn't foul in a spot that a lot of guys his size would have fouled. And I feel like that's a super noteworthy thing. And it's something that makes you think he could play in the playoffs. Like somebody who can do that and can shoot like he can play in the playoffs. So those were my main takeaways. But this Clippers game, we got to talk about this Clippers game because this is my favorite win of the season. It's not even all that close for me. Short Giannis. Giannis is going, he goes down sort of unexpectedly in warmups. It sounded like they were thinking he might go. He was doing his pregame warmup and then he was just struggling to get through it and he wasn't able to finish it. So we're short Giannis. We're down Khris. We've been down that for a while. We're thinking we're gonna need Portland Dame in this one. And first things first, we got Portland Dame. 41 points. He was 13 of 13 from the line after he was getting hacked all game. He should have been at the line even more given the first half. He was not getting any calls, but 12 of 22 from the field and 13 of 13 from the line. Like we haven't really seen that yet from him, that type of game. I guess he did have that Raptors game early in the season without Giannis, where he put up 37, I want to say, and he shot pretty efficiently. And then he had one more game where he did score 40. But this was the game where he needed, like, you needed it, or you were not going to have a shot. And he did it. He stepped up. He was obviously playing Russell Westbrook's team. He wasn't playing Russell Westbrook, so he didn't get to do his thing against Russ like we've seen over the years. But first, let's talk a little bit about Dame and how he's looked the first 6 games out of the break, because like I said, I don't think the numbers are showing exactly how he's been playing. I felt like a breakout was coming. Hopefully it came during this game against the Clippers, but Gunnar, what have you been seeing? Have you been seeing any real differences, or do you think it's more just that maybe he makes more shots on a given night right now?
First things first, yeah, he had to make more shots. That was inevitable, and that's something that we've complained about, and quote unquote complained, is Dame needs to be Dame on offense. Otherwise, this whole plan that we had of acquiring him not even being as aggressive really in offense as of late too, him just kind of flowing in the offense and not hitting shots. Well, that's not what we need out of you. So I was able to pull a stat of these last 6 games, what he's shooting from three. He is up to 40% in these last 6 games. And there is another stat too, which this one dates back even a little bit. I remember it, but I think it's like when Dame scores above 25 or something, our record's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So him speaking to that sheer volume of what we need out of him offensively, you just need to bring it. And sort of that quote what we talked about, I believe last Bucks episode with Giannis saying this is your team. I think what he means is be you. Like this is your team in the sense of don't worry about, oh my God, am I shooting 25 times? I think somebody else said this in the podcast too, but it's a really good way to put it is I've shot, oh my gosh, if I shoot 30 times tonight, is this going to ruin this? Giannis going to be mad at me? This is Giannis's team and he needs to score too. Don't think like that. You're Damian Lillard. Like you should think score first, honestly, especially in this offense. And not even to talk about his offense, I'd also found a stat too in his last 15 games, or it could be like 13-ish. It was hard how they pulled the numbers, but he has a 102.7 defensive rating. And then another stat, which I don't actually understand very much, he was third in defensive win shares, which is like right next to Brook. I think he was second, which again, that stuff is team defense and all that. It's not necessarily specific to him, but it tells you that he's doing a lot more of the right stuff that we need him to do in order to win. And I just think he needs to be himself, isn't necessarily shooting 40% all the time, but as I've said probably 3 times now, he just needs to be aggressive, Dame. And the difference is in these games, and this is something that people will probably point to, is a game like today or last night with the Clippers, is once Giannis does come back on the floor, we saw a lot of times in that fourth, times when we needed him to score, he's thinking, I'm taking this ball and I'm driving it. I'm trying to get a foul. I'm trying to score. I'm going to shoot a three. Like, will that still be the same when Giannis shows up? So I guess maybe that's the question I'll smack back to you, Spencer, is should it be that easy? How much of his game will he have to adjust, I guess, from what we saw last night to when Giannis comes back, either it's next game or whatever. We'll talk about his injury scare, but um, can he still play like he did last night, even with Giannis? Does he have to worry about Giannis in that sense?
I think people might disagree with me on this, but I think he's been playing like this since the All-Star break. I really do. I don't, I think he had a higher volume of touches and stuff last night because there was just a 32% usage player missing from the court. And the guy who started over him or in place of him was Patrick Beverly. Like you're not replacing that type of usage or even close to it with a guy like Pat Bev. I think he is doing what I want him to do since the break. And maybe he could be a little bit more aggressive still. For the most part, I think he's taking the shots. He's starting to shoot from deeper more consistently. And I said it earlier on a different episode, but to me, that's when I know he's starting to feel comfortable is when he is kind of pulling these deep shots, and it doesn't even matter if it goes in the first time. He'll still take it another time when it opens up. And the Bulls game, he ended up shooting 4 of 18, I want to say. I don't have it up right now, but I believe it was 4 of 18. But I didn't have a problem with the shots he was taking at any point. And I also was happy that he kept shooting while he was struggling from the field. He hit a late three in that game. He created a ton of open shots for everybody else by doing it because he still stretched the defense out to him. To me, this is what we need him to be. Now, obviously, the hope is that the 4 of 18 games don't happen very often and you get more of these 40-point outings, or at least the type of shooting he put up in that game. He does have to split. As much as we say, like, to simplify it, like, yeah, he needs to be him. There is still no ability for him to be exactly like he was in Portland because of Giannis. And that's fine. He just needs to be a close to that version as much as he can be with Giannis. And Khris coming back at some point is going to make it even a little bit more difficult, probably for a few games, which is why I'm hoping all three of them can be back together soon so that we can get that kind of figured out as soon as we can. I'm not super worried about all three of them figuring it out. Khris has always been willing to sacrifice. Dame is clearly at times too willing to sacrifice. I think they'll figure it out. But for me, replacing Crowder's starting minutes with Middleton is going to be more important than anything else that's happening right now because Jay's doing what we ask of him, but the complete inability to hit open threes right now is kind of killing all the value that he's bringing in other areas. Patrick Beverly, on the other hand, hitting open threes is making him incredibly valuable. And we'll talk about the new additions in a minute here, but I guess to wrap up this Clippers game, we haven't even talked about Bobby. Bobby was unbelievable in this game. Probably his best game I can remember as a Buck. I genuinely, on both sides, he was playing hard on defense. He was rarely out of position. And then he's still going to take some shots that I don't agree with throughout a game, including some just immediate touch fadeaways against guys who are smaller than him. And then Doc comes in after the game and goes, it was actually a pretty funny quote. I don't know if you saw it, but he said, we keep telling Bobby, if they're 6'7" when you catch the ball, they're going to be 6'7" when 3 seconds later. You don't have to shoot it right over the top of them right away. It's like, take your time, get to a spot you want to get to, and then shoot over the top. And down the stretch, he did that to Kawhi for like 4 possessions in a row. He got him kind of pushed into the paint and then shot like a hook shot over him, shot a shorter fadeaway over him. He was kind of giving Kawhi the business for a while, which I couldn't really believe. But he just, in general, since Doc showed up, it's been so much better for him. And yesterday was kind of a culmination of all of it because I thought that was the best game he's played as a Buck, period. He was just fantastic. We don't win without Dame, but we don't win that game without Bobby doing what he did as well. And yeah, especially Malik Beasley couldn't hit anything to save his life last night. So it was really needed. Yeah, I don't know. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about in this game?
Yeah, I could skim over some stuff. I mean, you mentioned Bobby and Dame, of course, offensively. I don't think Pat might have broken double digits in this one. I think he had like maybe 12, considering all of his threes ish. But
Beverly, yeah.
yeah. So somebody else, and this is a good point you had with Khris. Khris is almost more important than Giannis in that aspect, as you can look around our roster and you can see there's nobody else looking to score the basketball, which I told you in that fourth quarter. There is a question of Bobby was sort of missing assignments on defense, it looked like, and he was probably going to go back into his old sort of self, which we don't like on defensively. And I'm like, well, unfortunately, right now, he probably needs to stay out there for the offense because no one else is really looking to score. But you mentioned Beasley sucking too, shooting wise. We still shot 40% from threes, even considering that, with one of our best 3-point shooters not doing that. And he had a funny, I think it was his first three at the end of the third quarter. Doc came out and like hugged him in center court, which like I should tell you where the vibes are at right now at the team is I think we're down 10 at that point, and Doc was like excited and everyone is hyped up. And we'll mention the crowd later too. The crowd was absolutely insane for missing one star for sure. And of course, we consider Khris a star, but Khris has been out for a little bit. But Khris wasn't going to play tonight. But to have the crowd that into it on a Monday night was super cool to see. And guys like Patrick Beverly and Bobby, when he's playing good and he can feed off of it, along with Beverly, who brought it defensively multiple times and multiple defenders. Maybe they scored on a possession, maybe they did, whatever they did, but him just being disruptive and not necessarily faking the defense. I know that's the famous quote where he's just fooling people running around, but sometimes that works, like causing that much commotion that gets everybody else hyped up on defense. We can talk about sort of the defense I pointed out to you in that fourth quarter. I think we went to it was a zone for sure. I'm kind of scared to call it a zone. I saw
Yeah,
some people mention like a 2-3 zone. I'm
it
not sure
was.
it's even, yeah, I mean, that's probably the best way to wrap it up. But um, I think mentioning Kawhi, you brought up offensively, he didn't have his best game, but sometimes in zones, the idea is to get the ball to the middle, which Kawhi was able to do, but we were able to collapse in him so much where that mid-ranger was super hard for him to get to and actually make. So taking that whole game away from them, and they shot pretty good from three too. They might have even shot 40%. Um, but I think taking away that, and they got pretty stagnant too in the fourth quarter once James Harden stopped being himself or his old self and started being himself, which we know him as nowadays. Um, that's when the defense sort of kind of came together, I think, even though it was zone. I don't necessarily love zone. That was probably the good time to use it and kind of use it as sort of a poker chip to be like, we'll throw this at you. What are you going to do with it? And they had no answer for it. So then you kind of keep going to it. So um, good things all around, I think, defensively in this one, especially in that fourth quarter. But if you had anything in that defense, I know
Yeah,
you probably did.
yeah, I would consider it was a 2-3 that turned into kind of a matchup zone where Brook, when Kawhi was catching it, Brook just started kind of shadowing him once he caught it, where he followed him out to the 3-point line a couple times. He contested a mid-range and then on a pump fake was able to recover and get a block. It was really when I was texting you about Bobby messing things up in that zone, it was more about the fact that he shouldn't be in the middle of it. And
Hmm.
that was when they took Gallo out and put Brook in. And then that fixed that issue completely because then Bobby was more on the corner of the zone instead of being in the middle of it. Brook in the middle of it knew exactly what he was doing. Bobby was having a hard time getting out of the paint in time. He got a defensive three. He probably could have got a couple of them because I was watching him pretty closely. He was not doing a good job of kind of cleansing himself from the lane. But Brook did it perfectly, and by the time that happened, obviously, when you're in a zone, you're going to give up shots, and the Bucks were willing to give up some shots. They were trying to keep them to the people who weren't shooting well that night, and it worked out pretty well. It's not always going to work. Zone is kind of like you said, it's not honestly most of the time a great idea in the NBA, but when you mix it in randomly instead of saying, "Hey, we're going to try this," and then like our former coach this year was doing, sticking with it for 16 minutes of game time until it just wasn't working for the last 10. It's a lot
It
different.
shouldn't be a scheme. It should be more of like a
Yeah.
thing that it's in your play calling. Like you just
Yeah.
throw it out there when you need it.
Right. And then, I mean, that's all I have on the defense. I do want to touch quickly on the shot AJ Green took. I mentioned that Brook block. It came right after the Brook block. So Brook got the block. I don't remember who got the board, but it got pushed ahead to Dame. He kind of dribbled up to the right wing. He thought about taking a step back three going right against Paul George, which would have been pretty poetic, but he didn't take it. He ended up kicking it to Bobby, who flipped it right back to Dame, kind of dribbled over to the wing on the left side, and then AJ set just a tiny little screen just to try and get his guy involved in the action. Kind of slips it, catches it like a foot from the logo, And in my head, I kind of start turning to watch him swing the pass because I thought that was what was going to happen. I thought he was about to swing it to Bobby. And then as I'm turning my head a little bit, I see in the corner of my eye him rising up. And I'm like, I actually was excited as he shot it. I didn't care if it went in. The fact that he had I mean, the cojones to shoot that shot, the willingness to shoot that shot. It's a 2-point game with like 3.5 minutes left in the game. The Bucks had made this big run. He misses that. It could flip the momentum right back to the Clippers. They get the board, go down, score it. Like the game could be completely different. Not a split second of hesitation. Catches, shoots it, absolutely nails it. And then the game was over at that point. We got to stop again. I think we scored one more time after that. On the next possession, AJ kind of made an extra pass to Bobby, who hit a shot in the mid range. That type of the Bucks have not ever had anybody who shoots from that type of distance from three, and they have two guys now who can do it. And that's a big deal. That stretches the court in ways that nothing else can do. Giannis can stretch the court or compress the court by driving, and then you can have two guys who can shoot from 30 feet comfortably. How does the defense actually cover all that ground when all that's happening? And it's, I don't know, it's going to be hard for him to not get playoff minutes. I think it's going to be really hard for him not to. Doesn't mean it'll work in every game. Duncan Robinson, if they met, they just have to manage it like Spo manages Duncan Robinson minutes. If he's not making shots that day, he doesn't play. But if he comes in and hits his first shot, he might play 25 minutes because he gets hot pretty quick. And I think AJ can be a very similar player to that with even a little more defensive upside than I think Duncan has. I think he's a more capable defender than what Duncan is. I don't know, man. I can't believe how well he's playing. It's fun to actually finally have somebody that we picked up on a two-way or as an undrafted, and you're starting to actually see the payoff for it. We've had it happen against us. Every team that beats us in the playoffs has a guy who does it to us. The Heat always have three guys on their roster doing it to us, but finally having a guy in that situation is really nice to see. So
He's a sneaky. I saw a funny tweet. Someone said he's like fourth on the team in dog rating because he's kind of a
yeah,
sneaky guy with some energy, and he is. I mean, he seems quiet, but when he gets out there, like he brings energy. Maybe not as sometimes he shows it, not as much as Pat Bev or Bobby Portis, but he really does feed into that energy. And him being able to shoot, you called him a threat, like a 3-point threat. That's a good way to put it. Is when you don't have Khris out there, somebody needs to be a threat on offense, and when you got two guys who can shoot that deep. Dame's getting doubled in that situation. You should be shooting that shot. I told you, like I in my head, I was like, yeah, shoot that shot, please. And
oh
I'm
yeah,
like, oh wait, he actually shot it. And it went in perfectly. So he just needs to have that mentality all the time of if I get the ball, I'm open, shoot it. That's why
yep,
you're out there. He's also really good off ball, like just coming off
oh yeah,
screens and stuff like that, which I think Dame should probably do more of too. It's something that I've complained about with Giannis even just move around and try to get yourself open shots that way. But I mean, it's tiring too. I understand Dame's doing a bunch of other stuff. He's not Steph in that sense because Steph literally has no pulse. Um, but I think in a limited role, being himself, AJ Green, I think that makes a lot of sense for him to do. Especially if we don't have Khris say in a playoff series, which we'll get into that later. I think we will, but I don't see how you cannot not play AJ Green. And combined with everybody else on our roster, he just brings something totally different that we need. And I know you're probably have a follow up to this, but I don't want to not say this. There was a clip too of Bobby after the game talking about how him and Dame at the beginning of the fourth quarter were like, he went to Dame and said, "Look, we need to be playing this whole fourth quarter. Like we can win this thing." And Dame's like, "Yeah, I already told Doc I'm playing the fourth quarter." So it's just really cool to see that right now. And I keep mentioning vibes and morale, but man, it just feels so incredibly good right now. I know we got a tough stretch coming up here soon, but which was really going to test us for sure. Um, Even if the quality of teams aren't as good as maybe I think they're a little overblown, but regardless, it's going to be a tough road trip. Taking that trip to on the West Coast, it's going to be difficult no matter what. But I think they're still winnable games. It's just going to be a nice test for us finally to kind of put everything that we've learned right now in the second half of the year to test.
yeah, 100%. And what you just talked about with Bobby and Dame played the whole second half. It wasn't even just the fourth quarter. He never came out of the second half, which is impressive. I mean, I don't want that to be the normal situation or what we're seeing all the time because that's just going to wear him out by the time the playoffs do come around. But in a game like that, it was needed. And he was willing to do it and able to do it. And he even had lift on like that finish on the layup. He went right into, I can't remember if it was Paul George or Kawhi, but he took it right into their body. And I mean, he got up there. And this was probably after 8, 20 minutes in a row of game time playing. Like, and he still had that lift. So that was really nice to see. I think the buy-in that we've talked about before is really what's changed the most under Doc. With Doc at the helm, the Bucks, they're even talking about it in their post game about how he sat them down. He told all the role players, like, hey, this is what we need you to do. This is what you're doing currently. If it doesn't match up, we got to figure out how to get you to this spot that we need you to be in for us to be successful. And all of them have talked about how nice that is. Like just being told straight up, like, this is your job. This is what we need you to do. And that might change, because of an injury, like we just saw in the Clippers game. Now Bobby is like the second highest usage guy where he needs to be scoring. He has to be shooting because we don't have guys who will do it. But when the team's fully healthy, guys need to know their roles. And to me, that's what Doc changed the most. You can see that players are bought in. He also simplified stuff at the same time. And we've heard from a lot of players talking about that, how the defensive scheme, and we mentioned this on earlier podcasts, it seemed like there was just way too many moving parts under Griffin, where we're doing 3 different pick and roll coverages based on which person is getting screened. Like players can't keep track of that. The game moves too fast for stuff like that. This is what we're doing. Now, Bobby might blitz once in a while, but that's what he's going to do when he's on the court. There's not going to be hey, Bobby might blitz, but he might drop and he might, no, it's steady. It's hard and fast. This is the rules. These are the rules we're playing by right now. This is what we do. There's no confusion. And I mean, you talked about the defensive rating being the best in the NBA during the stretch. It was already improved greatly, even going into the All-Star break. It was just the offense needed to catch up at that point. And what we're also seeing is the offense starting to make a lot more logical sense too, which means one, Dame talked about it after the game in his post game yesterday. He said, Doc came in and said, why aren't you running this? Why aren't you running that? From his time in Portland, he's like, why would you not be doing the things you're good at? Like, why are we not running this type of offense? So now I didn't even think about it. I don't know if he talked about this specifically, but he's bringing the ball up the right side way more often now and then moving to the left. That's always what he's done. I've watched him a lot. He's always been bring the ball up the right side, and then he likes to go left, and he likes to get into a shot going that direction. He likes to drive that way, and he likes to pass out of. That's just the way he likes to move. And obviously, he can go right. He's a right-handed player. That's his dominant hand. But I keep saying I don't want to rip on Griff, but the guy was awful. He was a terrible coach. He was just absolutely horrendous. I don't think he will ever get a head coaching job again because of this stretch. I do hope he gets the chance to continue being an assistant. I think he's probably good in that role where he doesn't have as much on his plate, where it's not his sole responsibility, but he was not ready for this job and he wasn't even remotely qualified for it. And Doc came in and made some of the most simple changes you could possibly make, stuff that us random people watching games could have told you this is what we should be doing. And now he looks like a genius. He looks like a genius just for doing stuff like that. But to me, the biggest change is the buy-in because of what he's able to do, which is to explain why we're doing things. This is how we're doing it. This is why we're doing it. And this is how it's going to benefit you. If you can explain all that to players, how are they not going to buy into it? Because it completely lays out exactly what they need to do. And I also think some of it has to do with the addition of Pat Bev. I think he also brings the same type of energy and a belief in Doc that he could bring to the locker room and say, hey, he knows what he's doing. He's helped me. He's helped a bunch of players get to where they want to be. And then in the end, it may not have worked out in the playoffs, but he's helped a lot of players. So to me, that's one of the bigger things that Pat Bev has brought to the table is being able to help with the buy-in and being able to help with the energy and all of that stuff. But when you watch the games, it's just a completely different level of focus, of energy, of buy-in. And that was my concern the entire time with Griffin. And it never came. We never saw it. And they made the choice. They made the right choice at the right time. And I still see the national media at times questioning that move. Not quite as much the last 6 games, weirdly enough. I don't hear much Bucks talk at all the last 6 games, which is weird. They don't have a chance to rip on Doc. But yeah, Gunnar, what do you think has changed? What have you noticed, I guess, under Doc? And how has a guy like Pat Bev maybe helped move that process along too since he came in?
Mm-hmm. You hit the two biggest things in the head, and I'll just quickly skim over them. But defining roles was my biggest thing that you said, and making things more simple. And I also quoted the Dame quote of last night too, where using his offensive sets, doing things that make him comfortable, because we know how important Damian Lillard is to the team. One thing I also think is a huge thing when Doc came into this, which was very obvious to anybody with, again, half a brain, but something that we never corrected was transition defense. If you just corrected that in itself, our defense was going to shoot up the rankings very, very fast. We were always in bad position. Those are easy, easy baskets we're giving up consistently during games. We were dead last, bottom five. That maybe that's where we peaked as bottom five, under Griffin. And Doc definitely talked about how if we can just clean that up, then what's that's what's going to happen is we're going to be a better defensive team. And we've done a lot of different things in addition to that, but that one was just a sore thumb all year long. The other sore thumb, I think, and I haven't been able to check the stats as far as like the last 6 games are under Doc. Maybe you have it on top of your head, but rebounding was obviously a big one that we were getting killed in. Now, I don't know what exactly that number is, but I can tell you that we're in a lot better position to the point where we're not getting killed anymore. It doesn't feel like it's just a complete we have no chance. Guys are just completely out hustling us. And you brought up energy. That's part of that too, is being aggressive and being in better spots, boxing out, all that little stuff, which sounds stupid again, but it's real. And if you're buying into the defensive schemes that you're doing, I think guys will just be more willing to go do that. I mean, Pat Bev's, he's not grabbing rebounds necessarily, but he is under there, under the rim, poking at balls all the time, trying to swipe at balls. I've seen Dame do it the last couple of games, even. Just guys doing that in general, I think helps. And probably just to sum all that up was communication is something that Doc really harped on. And we've seen it. You can literally hear it on games sometimes, guys yelling at each other and communicating on defense. I heard it, a stat. I don't know. I can't fact check it for sure, but I saw somebody say or heard somebody say we're like up 20 to 25% on switches on defense, which I don't even know where to look for that for. But
JJ
um,
Redick was talking about that.
yeah, so that's where I heard that. Which again, that ties into the communication part of it. You can't just, it's nice to say, oh, let's just switch this and switch that. It's difficult to do that when you're doing that 1 through 5. Guys need to all be bought in. Guys need to be able to do it once. Well, for sure, they got to be able to do it. And our lineups always aren't going to feature the most defensively talented players. Something that we also harped on this year was it's not always on the players. I understand they're not super defensively minded guys, but we've seen us do better with worse at times. So I think it's just really all those things, everything you said, all those things, simple stuff. But once you fix those things, combined with the talent that we have, we don't even have Khris yet, as we mentioned 5 times already. I think we're on a lot better path
Yeah,
than we were before. And you mentioned Patrick Beverly, what he's brought. I agree with everything you said. Gallo, he dunked. He had a nice putback dunk. I think
I
that's his
couldn't
best highlight.
believe that.
And you mentioned his defense too, and what a little bit of it, but I think to mention it more is he definitely moves a lot better. And I think that's the part you mentioned where I just figured he's this old guy. I keep joking that he reminds me of Ursan, but he kind of does, I guess, in a way. He doesn't get the charges that Ursan does, but he moves a lot like him. He's gonna shoot. Um, but I think that's what hopefully he brings his shot. He missed a three last night, but it looks good. Still coming out of the hand and everything. He just needs to actually make one. That'd be nice to see him have one go down at some point. But I also need to see more minutes of him. But he's a nice chip to have again if guys are down. I just don't want to see him in the playoffs, I guess. But
Right.
um,
You know who he actually reminds me of a little bit is like early season Ingles last year, where
mhm.
Ingles wasn't making shots. He's not a fast, he doesn't move that well, but he's very smart with understanding tendencies of players and stuff. And Gallo just kind of cuts guys off before they even move, knowing that this is where they want to go. And that's kind of the stuff Ingles did on defense. Now, I think Joe Ingles is a better player than Gallo currently. I think last year's version of Ingles was a better player than what Gallo is right now, but I couldn't believe he got up and dunked on the putback. I was not expecting.
That wasn't a rim grazer either. He got
No,
above the
yeah.
rim.
I I half expected to see the replay and see that it was clearly like basket interference or something, that the ball was just
Hmm.
hanging on the rim or something, but no, he that was real. He got up and he seems like a really good fit, like culture wise too. Saw the video after the game in the locker room of Doc kind of giving him crap about dunk of the year. And he just did like the raise the roof thing with his hands. And he he seems like he gets along with people pretty well. I know him and Giannis are definitely, they at least know each other. They're personable and knew each other
Hmm.
decently. So I'm sure that played a role. But in terms of Pat Bev, I feel like even beyond the court stuff, this is what I expected from Bev. I expected him to annoy other teams while also doing a lot of things to just, he makes winning plays. And I actually saw something for his career. I'm going to try and pull it up while I talk here, but Andy Bailey, I want to say, is who tweeted it out. Bev, while he's been playing for the Bucks, he's making shots right now, which makes everything better on offense. Like when he's hitting threes, he's a very, very helpful player. Even when he's not, though, he brings so much on the defensive side of the ball that like you can live with the missed shots as long as he's not forcing them. And so far, he's going to force a shot or two a game. Like that happens. There's going to be bad shots. Like we talked about when we got him, I'm bracing myself for the first blow up and a stupid technical in a bad moment or an ejection when we really can't afford him to get tossed, something like that. That's who he is. But I think the biggest thing is that he is who he is. And it's organic and it's real. Like he's not, there's no fake toughness, there's no fake hustle. It is real constantly. And I talked about that Brook block in the Clippers game. Like that was one of those plays that you kind of alluded to where Bev actually sprinted from the right wing. He left, or the left wing, I should say. He left Norm Powell completely alone because he knew there was no way Kawhi would have had to throw the pass over his head to make the pass. Like there was no way he would even see him. He sprinted all the way down to the left block, swiped at the ball, and made Kawhi go up probably a step quicker than he wanted to. And when he did that, that's when Brook was able to get this block because he was kind of trailing the play. And he just does stuff like that. And it wouldn't show up on a stat sheet and it wouldn't show up on anything. But when you watch him, you appreciate him much more. And I think that was kind of what I tried to tell you when it happened is like the more you watch him, the more you appreciate what he does. And I just found it here. But for his career, he, when he's on the court, his teams are +5 for his career. He's only been negative once in his entire career in terms of on-off net rating. The teams are just always better when he's on the court. And like I said, you're going to have some moments where people are going to get frustrated with him, and I'm going to as well. He's going to do something dumb. It's going to be at a bad time, and it'll happen, and it's going to suck at that time. But all the little things that he does throughout the game that people don't notice or people don't give him credit for, to me, that's what cancels out that stupid mistake or that cancels out that stupid shot. And we saw in the Bulls game, he's capable of even creating his own shot at times. He went on that 8-0 run by himself, but then he also hit like a fadeaway. If you need it from him, or if it's an end of shot clock type of situation, it's not PJ Tucker where he literally couldn't get a shot up if it was that type of situation. Like Bev is capable of at least getting the shot, getting himself some space, getting himself a shot. And if he's open, he's a much better shooter than what PJ is in terms of just, he's more of a threat offensively than what PJ is. So I'm very excited about him. I think you covered Gallo really well. I don't have much to add on that. I just think the Ingles comp makes sense to me because he's actually passed better than I expected him to. He's got really,
Hmm.
I knew that was part of his game, but he's a good passer and he might be one of the better lob throwers on the team because we don't have many of them and he's actually pretty good at it. But the other two guys I think we got to talk about who have just completely kind of revitalized their season since the break, but really even since the deadline, you can go back to Bobby and Pat Connaughton. Bobby and Pat they're back to what we wanted them to be going into the season. And I mean, you can go back and listen. I was not confident in that at all. I didn't believe in that. I thought they made a mistake not at least trading Bobby. The current Bobby can play in the playoffs. Like I didn't think we were getting that. I really didn't. And what he's doing right now, that is a playable player in the playoffs. I said play a lot there, but the defense is stepped up to a point where it's not even just like passable. It's like average defense, even I would say. Like it's not just, oh, he's kind of holding his own. He makes dumb mistakes. He's gonna overdo it. He's gonna get some stupid fouls. Like, but he's feeding off of guys like Pat Bev's energy. And during the championship run, he fed off a guy like PJ, and that gave him energy to maybe focus more on defense and somebody being on him on the court to be like, hey, you need to be here, you got to be here, and hyping him up when he does something small that might not get noticed. Like if you watch Pat Bev during a dead ball, if somebody did something smart on the Bucks, he goes over and immediately gives them credit for it and like hypes them up for it. And that matters to players to be noticed for doing those things. And Bobby especially feels like he kind of needs that like stroking the ego type thing for him. And I don't know, man. Pat's shooting like 45% the last month and a half from three, and he's not shooting a ton of them or anything, but that's the type of player we need from him. We need him to make shots. And if he does, everything else is okay for the most part. He's doing better. He's moving his feet better. He's playing better defense. He's leaving his feet less on pump fakes and stuff. It's, I don't know. Both of them look like guys who can play in the playoffs. And there's going to be matchups they might not be perfect in and stuff. But Gunnar, what have you seen from those two? Yeah.
I was going to argue, it's not argue, I guess, but I was going to raise the question of who's maybe more important of those two going into the playoffs. And I think Pat, I could see a world where he's 6'5", 6'6", 6'7". Obviously, he's going to real, hopefully could be switchable and make shots and defend at an okay rate. So then you're thinking, well, that's a playoff player. But you think of our roster and what we need. Bobby is very, very important if he can be playable in the playoffs. You can play smaller lineups. He can fake as a big, I guess. He's not really a guy you rely on that, but you can give Brooke a break. His scoring, as we mentioned, just in that Clippers game, how much that was needed if he took a night off and scoring. And he got 18 points last night. It wasn't going to be enough probably. So he needed to be that. And he's always brought the offense this year too. It's just how can you play within the offense doing that, taking smart shots, and not just sort of doing his classic ball hogging in the post up. And then you mentioned how he just kind of throws a shot up. Well, it's going to go in sometimes, but sometimes it's not. And then you're just kind of putting yourself in a bad spot. So I just think if they're both even doing well, I think Bobby is maybe more important for us in the playoffs. But Pat, speaking to him, you mentioned the shooting that's been really good for a while. Even when we were super down on him, he was even shooting like what 37% or something at that point.
Yeah.
Like he's been shooting good all year. It's just gonna be can everything else could he have a brain sometimes and not go into the sixth row on a on a pump fake and could this play smart on defense and hang. I think he can, but we've been talking about AJ Green. I do think it probably does come down between those guys who's going to get minutes if it did come down to that. And I think if Bobby's playing well and all that, I would probably rather see AJ Green just based on his aggressiveness, being able to shoot and being a real threat in something rather than just kind of being Pat, where even if he's going good, it's kind of just like okay at everything, which is so valuable to have. But bringing up like a new threat, I think would be better. But those guys playing good and being options for us for the playoffs is definitely something that can't go understated at this point, especially from us knowing how much we rip these guys. Uh, I won't apologize to either of them because it's only been 6 games after the All-Star break, and there's plenty of time to not do the right things at that point. But I'm definitely excited. I love Bobby Portis when he's yelling in the crowd like last night, and he's making huge shots, timely shots at that. Like those were humongous shots to make, and combined with being okay on defense and bringing the energy, that's a game changer for sure, easily. And I guess I'm just excited for both of those guys to at least have the option, like I said, for the playoffs.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm not apologizing to him yet. Frankly, I might not ever apologize to him because they were terrible for that stretch. But I do think what we talked about with Doc is really playing a big part in that. And I do think we can probably account for a decent amount of those struggles being Griff related, where they weren't put in the right spots to succeed. They were asked to do things they're not good at or capable of doing, really. Now they're being asked to do things they're capable of. They're being told, hey, this is what your job is. This is what you do. Go do it. You know you can do it. And they're doing it. And it's so nice to see. It's so nice to see. But I do agree with you that there's a decent chance I could see AJ making more sense. It could be a series by series thing with those two, even. I think certain series it might make more sense for Pat to be out there than AJ, especially if he is shooting the ball like he is right now. But other series it might make more sense to put the guy who's just got the threat of seriously making 6, 7 threes if he gets hot in a guy like AJ. So it'll be interesting. All of this is still going to come down to Doc's playoff rotations and stuff, which is still, I guess, who I will apologize to is Doc. I'm ready to do that already because
I was
I
going to
call
call you out because behind the scenes, and it's not, I was going to call you out in a bad way because it was totally okay, but we're coming off the loss to the Grizzlies, I believe, going into the All-Star break. Um, and you were texting me pretty down saying, I don't know, Gunnar, it may not happen. And I'm like, well, we're trending up on defense, but definitely we talk about vibes. I mentioned it 20 times again today, but they were low at that point.
oh yeah.
And I was let you speak to this part. I think everything for every reason that why you were down, I would agree with. It's just you can't lose sight of what the goal is at the end of the day. So I didn't really care about record. I know you don't care about record either, but the goal was to be better in the playoffs, and I think we're trending up in that direction even at that point. Um, I know the half court offense was a problem. I think we'll be better in that. The defense is looking better. So we thought we were going to be better in that. I just think the arrow was pointing up, and Doc at least gives me a chance. And I guess, yeah, I mean, I'll kick it back to you, but what sort of has changed for you? I mean, obviously the wins are the wins. I know, like I just said, we don't care about the record, but
Yeah.
in these last 6 games, what's really flipped it for you? And really, do you believe that we have a chance now to win the championship with Doc Rivers?
Yeah. And last time we did the podcast, I did say that I still believed we could do it. I think when it comes to Doc, I was very bought into this idea from other people, probably more than anything, that he has all these faults, and he does. And the playoffs have been a problem, and he does have things that he needs to work on. I do think that when he has a very mature type of roster, which is what this Bucks team is, it's a team who's been there. It's even the younger guys are pretty mature. I mean, you could maybe, we don't know for sure. Marjan feels like the one guy out of the younger guys who might have some pity party stuff and some immaturity issues at times. But AJ clearly has a really good head on his shoulders. Ajax has a really good head on his shoulders. Livingston, when he's around, seems to be pretty level headed and into the game. And just, I think everybody wants to win on this team. And Doc has had to deal with a lot of different egos over the years. I mean, you can look at Chris Paul and Blake Griffin had problems with each other. They were doing well, but they didn't like each other. James Harden is James Harden. He's tough to deal with as a coach, no matter what. Even going back to those Celtics games or Celtics years, I mean, KG and Paul Pierce and Ray Allen, those guys were super competitive. And Ray Allen didn't really have any issues, but we've learned quite a bit about Paul Pierce since his career ended, that probably not the most mature dude and probably not the smartest guy in the world. KG is almost competitive to a level where it could probably be just tough to keep him under control at times. And it wasn't that he wasn't focused or that he wasn't that dude just had such a motor that it may have made it hard to coach him at times. He's always dealt with rosters that kind of felt like they were talented, but maybe not put together super well. This roster kind of feels like the opposite of that, where I don't know if you would say top to bottom, it's as talented as like that Celtics team. I think it's up there with the Clippers and Sixers for sure. It's probably better than some of those. But in terms of having two superstars who are about as level-headed and mature as you can possibly ask for, that's what they've got right now. That's kind of what the Warriors did for a long time. Obviously, they just did a really good job keeping Draymond under wraps enough to make it work, but that's kind of what a team needs. And when a veteran coach who knows what he's doing, can come in and explain to all these vets who are they're cerebral in their own way, like they're smart, they understand the game, they know what works and what doesn't. And when a coach like Griff is doing stuff and they know it's not going to work, you're not going to get the buy-in. And Doc has come in and he's done everything that makes sense. And what more can you really ask for from a coach than for him to come in and just do the right thing and be smart? And who knows how it'll go in the playoffs, but I called him a bad coach when I heard we were going to hire him. I don't know that I'm ready to say he's like a great coach, but I do think he's a good coach. He's basically a Bud level coach, a coach that can win a championship. That's what Bud was. He's not a guy who's going to go win you a championship, which I think a guy like Eric Spoelstra is capable of doing with a roster that's not that great. But he's a top 10 coach probably in the league overall. Like Doc is a borderline top 10 coach in the league. And with the talent you have on the Bucks, you can win a championship with a borderline top 10 coach. Adrian Griffin was the 30th ranked coach in the league. He was the worst coach in the league. I'm done. Like, I don't even feel bad anymore. Like he was so bad. I can't believe how bad he was. Nothing he did made sense. And in retrospect, we're even learning more about how he just wasn't ready for it. And now we have a guy who's capable of doing it. And I didn't like the idea of it. I still don't think he's the best coach we could possibly have. But given the circumstances and a midseason hire, it's hard to ask for much more. And it's hard to ask for much more from him so far in terms of how he's handled everything, outside of maybe a few media tidbits he gave out that made him sound stupid and made things not look good. Made him sound like he wasn't comfortable or that he wasn't enjoying it, but he's doing the job and he's doing what I hoped any new coach would come in and do, which is to just get things back under control. And he's done it. So I will apologize to him. Bobby, Pat, you got to show me more. I might do it at some point. All right, you got anything else on Doc or those guys, or we talk about our looming injury issues at the moment?
Yeah, it's a slide to that, even though it's depressing.
Yeah, we won't spend too much time here, but obviously we talked about it. Giannis sat out of that Clippers game. Khris has been out for about 4 weeks now, post ankle sprain from that Suns game. Giannis, we saw the video on Twitter. I don't know if everyone saw it, but there was a video going around Twitter of Giannis kind of reacting to the pain he was having in his left Achilles. He went up to shoot like a mid-range jumper, it looked like, as part of his warm-up, and as he bent his knees to go up, he just immediately dropped the ball and like started limping away, which never enjoy seeing that at any point for him. Then he spent a bunch of time trying to stretch it out and he just couldn't get it loose enough. So he's been on the injury report with this Achilles tendonitis for off and on, at least throughout the season. It seems like something he's been able to deal with, but it kind of concerns me that it keeps popping up and that this time it was bad enough that he couldn't play and that he looked to be in that much pain. Knowing Giannis's body, the guy seems to be able to heal at super. I mean, nobody really heals like Giannis. We saw it in the finals. Nobody should have been able to play in those circumstances that he played on that knee in the finals, and especially to play like he did. So I never worry too much about injuries with Giannis just because of the way he's been able to heal, but it didn't look comfortable. That video did not make me feel very good watching him walk around after feeling that sharp pain. So I guess what's your concern level for him? And then when it comes to Khris, what's your concern level for both of them at the moment?
With Giannis, you mentioned the video. I think if I never got to see that video, I would have zero concern for every
Yep.
reason you just mentioned because of he's literally superhuman. Um, I played Twitter doctor and internet doctor. I Googled Achilles tendonitis and they said it's basically a day-to-day thing and maybe weeks, but knowing all the factors that we just laid out with Giannis, I think if it was like a playoff game, he probably still would have even pushed through it, even if that was the circumstance where he's collapsing on the ground and he's in that much pain, he would have found a way to play, I'm sure. But um, the fact that it's nagging and it's a new thing that we've haven't had to deal with him, I guess that's concerning, but he'll figure it out by the playoffs. I'm not really that concerned. But with Khris, we obviously heard that he was playoff ready coming right out. If we're not playoff ready, if it was a playoff game, he would have played coming out of the All-Star break. But it's been 6 games and we still haven't seen him. I'm not sure if we've got an update outside of probably this usual of I don't know. We'll see what happens. Maybe he'll play, but he it's going to be important for him even on this nice stretch of what we're doing right now to be able to get within the offense and everything going into the playoffs. You don't want to be in a situation where you're trying to figure it out at the last second. And then you're going to the playoffs and we saw what happens last time. If you're a 1 seed versus an 8 seed, it does not matter if the team's ready to go and you're going to have a nice matchup in the first round. In today's NBA, it's going to be competitive. And it looks like we'll get the 2 seed or whatever, but or 2 or 3 seed pretty comfortably. So I guess yeah, I'm just concerned in that aspect. And we mentioned what Khris means. I think we do need him to win a championship. I think we're proving that we can still compete and we can still have a chance. But if you're telling me Khris re-aggravates it and he's out for the year somehow, or they're lying to us a little bit and not being as honest of how severe it is, I would be pretty concerned because we do need another scorer on this team. But overall, I got to take their word for it, and they're telling me they're gonna be fine. So I got to go with that, unfortunately, right now. But yeah, I just think Khris. We assume Giannis is gonna be fine. I think Khris is a lot more important than maybe it seems.
Yeah, I feel like people don't really understand ankle sprains when they talk like an ankle sprain. This is not that abnormal of a timeline for an ankle sprain. I think they just originally thought, oh, it might be shorter if everything goes perfectly, that's usually how they kind of lay it out. But 4 to 5 weeks, I think Bradley Beal missed like 5 to 6 weeks early in the season with his ankle sprain. Like it's not that abnormal of a timeline. It's just people worry about Khris. I get it. There's a lot of injuries. I'll say again, this was a pretty fluky injury and a pretty unavoidable injury. There really wasn't anything he could do when he goes up for a jumper and KD's foot ends up right below it. For all the Kevin Durant talks of him having a huge foot and it being on the line, nobody wants to talk about it now when it comes up under Khris's foot. But I'm not very worried about either of them. Like you said with Giannis, I just don't think there's much concern about it lingering too much. And if it does, he's kind of the type of guy who can just play through that stuff and get through it and deal with it at the end of the day when the game's over. If Khris does end up being hurt, it is going to be an issue, but this particular injury just does not concern me long term. My only concern right now is hopefully getting him. I'd love to get him like a month back before the playoffs. Like if we can get him in the next 2 weeks and then give him 3 to 4 weeks to work with the team again and get reacclimated to everything, that's the most ideal to me, but I'm not super worried about it. Okay, let's finish with a few notes here. We've got to go. The Bucks filled that third two-way deal, so they took quite a while to fill the first open two-way spot, and then they filled it the other day with a player that came from Australia, actually, which was interesting. He went undrafted a couple years ago. Jalen Galloway is his name. He's a forward. He's 6'7". He went undrafted 2 years ago, and then he was part of the T-Wolves Summer League team last year, or this past summer, I should say. He's played for the Sydney Kings in Australia for the last 4 years. He was a finalist for Most Improved Player this past season. He averaged 10 points, 3 boards, 1.5 assists, and over a steal a game. He shot about 54% from the field. He doesn't look like the shot is going to be the selling point. He looks pretty athletic from the video I've seen. Supposed to be a pretty good defender. Kind of the opposite of like the AJ Green approach that they took. This is more of we're trying to take an athlete and mold him and probably make him a capable shooter, probably more along the lines of like an Andre Jackson or a Khris Livingston, actually, in terms of the mold. It kind of feels like they're just trying to give themselves as many shots at finding a wing as they can in terms of Marjan, Ajax, Khris Livingston, and now Galloway. I don't mind that approach. I think you throw enough things throw enough ideas out there, throw enough things out there and just try them out and see how they go. You're probably pretty likely to see at least one of these guys develop into a legitimate rotation player, which the Bucks could really use going forward, as we do like the roster right now, but it's definitely old, and we're definitely going to need to see some young players kind of introduced back into the system at some point here. So the other two notes I had here were Bolden, the guy the Bucks actually opened up a two-way spot by letting him go, signed a two-way with the Charlotte Hornets, who he had just finished a 10-day contract with. He actually apparently looked pretty decent in that, so good for him. Cool that he's getting another two-way opportunity. And then the other guy the Bucks released from a two-way spot, Lindell Wigginton, actually got traded by the Herd for a former Badger in Aleem Ford, who I had at one point tweeted out Aleem Ford as a freshman. I said, Aleem Ford is going to play in the NBA one day. And thanks to COVID, he got a 10-day contract, and I got to say I was right. So he can shoot. He's actually pretty athletic. He just never really seemed to find. I watched every year he was supposed to be the breakout guy for the Badgers, and he never really did. But he definitely can shoot. He's had a few like 10 and 11 3-point games in the G League since the time he's been in there. So he can get really hot from three. So he's at least interesting enough and a nice guy to have on a G League team for sure. But yeah, Gunnar, why don't we finish up with our random Bucks?
I think we might have picked him before, but my mind can't stray. Uh, so we didn't. Spencer's shaking his head no, which is good. I'm shocked we haven't, but I picked TJ Ford. Quick story. I was at jury duty. This will be the last time I mentioned jury duty, but I was sitting in the lobby and some woman walks by in a TJ Ford jersey at the courthouse. And I was like, wow, this is the last place I expected to see that. But yeah, what I remember of TJ Ford was the viral photo of him in the baggy jersey and the NBA draft, whatever, the classic photos they always take. And then he was a super talented guy, but I think he had that obviously devastating spine injury, which he
Yep.
had even in his college days. But back then, it somehow got swept under the rug a little bit, how he was more than likely going to turn out the way that he turned out with a very severe injury. And the Bucks just kind of ignored that. But I heard a podcast recently with CP3 and Dwayne Wade, and CP3 was talking about how he did work out with the Bucks in his draft, but we told him no because we had TJ Ford, which makes total sense back then. But now it's like, damn, TJ Ford was the reason why we could not have Chris Paul in the Bucks. And we ended up with Andrew Bogut, which I guess was okay. But yeah, so a lot of depressing stuff there. But
Oh yeah.
Spencer, who is your guy?
I'm going with another pretty highly touted prospect at one time. I actually watched the 2003 McDonald's All-American game with LeBron in it at one point, and I saw Charlie Villanueva out there running around. He was a big time prospect at that point, and he was a pretty big draft pick early on too. But yeah, he had a solid career for the Bucks. Honestly, the thing I just want to talk about really is his famous tweet that he had as a member of the Bucks when he at halftime goes to his phone and tweets about this was well before tweeting was normal and stuff, but there were no rules in the NBA at that point about tweeting because it was so new. And he just goes, "Yeah, coach is saying we gotta play better. I gotta step it up." And then he has a huge second half, and the Bucks beat the Celtics. And um, yeah, it's just a funny moment in time. And I know it's come up a little bit more recently. And Richard Jefferson was on that team and talked about it on Pat Bev's pod, and just funny. He was a good player. He was a fun player. He could shoot, kind of a stretch for a little before his time, but
They were traded for each other. I just realized that right now.
yeah, that's right. They were. You're right. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, Charlie V at the time, I mean, as a kid, I always was a little confused why he didn't have hair. Obviously, he had alopecia. And but I mean, I loved watching him play when I was a kid. I always liked big men who could shoot, especially back then, because it was a lot more rare at the time. And he could step out and hit five, six threes in a game. And it was always fun to watch him. He was a good athlete too. He never he kind of was undersized for a four at the time, and that made it tough for him on the defensive end, and also for him to kind of be able to hang down low in the post. And him being the outlier in terms of shooting actually made it hard for him to do everything else because back then fours were pretty much what centers are now, and they were both down there kind of bruising big men. And but he had a pretty decent career. I don't have the numbers up right now, but I remember him in Toronto having still playing pretty well, and I know he killed the Bucks a couple times, even on top of his time here. I know he played pretty well against us a few times. I remember always hating his revenge games that he would have, but I think he probably lasted a decade in the league. Yeah, '05 draft, played through 2015, 16, played with Dallas at the end there. Yeah, I remember a couple Detroit games where he went off against us and probably hit five or six threes, like I was saying. But he did have a season with us where he averaged 16. I didn't quite realize that 16 a game back then for the Bucks was that might have led the team. Now Giannis doubles that, but he I mean, I enjoyed him. I always liked stretch bigs at that time, like I said, and I'm not trying to make light of the alopecia, but that always made him very memorable too for me. He always stuck out to me because of that. So, yeah, no, I was a big Charlie V fan. I think I have a few autograph cards of him because I really enjoyed him. And yeah, that was all I got. You got any Charlie V stories you want to share?
No, a couple. I mean, first, I'll say that 2008 team, I've talked to you about it a little bit, but Mo Williams, Michael Redd, Bobby Simmons, who's at the game last night. So that's a good tie-in.
Yep.
So now we can't use him for random bucks, but Charlie V and then Andrew Bogut, that team, I was shocked. I think they won probably like 30 games, and I was like, how, like, that's a really good starting five. And I guess maybe we didn't have a bench or something, and Michael Redd was hurt on and off. But then second, you mentioned obviously the Twitter part of it. And he was really a pioneer because you got to think back to back then. And Richard Jefferson mentioned this, but the NBA had no idea how to control what Twitter was at that point. So
Yeah.
if you think about it, it seems stupid now to be like, oh, you're on your phone tweeting during the game. It kind of makes sense back then. It's just like you're just updating your life. And there was a good tweet. He was like saying how we had to play better. I got to play better in the
Yeah.
game. So, um, just to think about how much could have changed maybe, and he was the reason why it's no longer allowed. But somebody had to be the first to
Oh
test
yeah.
the waters, and it was Charlie V.
Yeah. Yeah. Richard Jefferson said that they created all the rules because of that tweet
Hmm.
from Charlie. I also like how he just called it the twit. He didn't say Twitter or to tweet. He said snuck to the twit, I think is what the tweet said. So he was he was a funny guy. He seemed like a really, really good teammate and stuff too along the way.
Hmm.
And I know that's part of the reason he lasted as long as he did in the league is that teams liked having him around, and the shooting obviously played a role in that too. But yeah, I didn't even put together that they were traded for each other until we were talking about it. So that's pretty funny. Yeah, I think that's all we got for this one. So for those of you sticking around, please like and subscribe on whatever platform you are listening on. Remember to follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod. And as always, please feel free to leave us feedback on how we can get better. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time with the Brewers episode.
Go Bucks.